Thank God it's Friday. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the program. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. We're turning our attention to Mr. President's three-day visit to the Rainbow Nation, and this is coming aftermath renewed xenophobic attack in South Africa. Recall that some Nigerians were affected. The chairman of Air Peace became some sort of a local hero when he, for free, took his airplane there to bring in Nigerians who are willing to return. As we speak right now, Mr. President is meeting with Cyril Ramaphosa, who is talking about the need for them to see each other as brothers and how to ensure that this issue doesn't happen again. We'll be reviewing what has happened in the past days as well as what we look forward to seeing aftermath this much talked about meeting. I'm joined by public affairs analyst Adeniyi Kunnu. Thank you so much for finding time to come this morning.
Thank you very much for having me this morning.
So you hear President Cyril Ramaphosa rather, saying that early warning mechanisms are going to be checked such that before the attack happens, they would have gotten the intelligence and being able to walk around that particular development. Let's begin by finding out how optimistic you are about Mr. President's visit to South Africa.
Well, it will not be ideal to see negatives in the president of your country going out of the geographical space that he bears rule over to another country, even if, certain failures actually show that people are not happy, that eventually paid the visit to South Africa, that it would have been the other way around at the height of the violence. Some other persons have said, well, the president spoke too late. But let me say it's better late than never.
I've heard that as well, the fact that President Ramaphosa should have come over. Wouldn't that be like you're summoning the president of another nation?
No, I do not think...
When we already had an envoy coming to make discussions in that light.
Well, I think that the discussions has gone ahead, envoys making representations for their country. It has gone to the point where the diplomatic, communication has to be between two presidents. Don't forget that at the height of the violence, Cyril Ramaphosa made a statement, definitely more or less giving the command to the security operatives to go all out and do their job, and as well appealing somewhat to those who should know that it is completely xenophobic. And don't forget at the same time that no president or no leader of South Africa has been bold enough to come out and call what happened xenophobia. So the discussion or diplomatic communication has gone beyond envoys making representation. It has come to the level where presidents of one country speak to the president of another country.
And does it matter where precisely this meeting holds?
Well, at the moment, it really is inconsequential, being that the president of my country is in South Africa. Whatever discussions one would have expected Ramaphosa to have with my president is already going on in South Africa. But what is important going forward is to ensure that we do not have a recurrence of this type of what actually is called for the high-level diplomatic communication between two presidents. And of course, understand what are the underlying issues that actually have been prompting this to happen time and again. Only recently, the All Truck Drivers Association or Foundation in South Africa is saying, how on earth could you have like Zimbabwe's driving trucks in South Africa? How on earth did they get the paperwork to actually be drivers in South Africa? When South Africans are there who can drive, who have got the necessary paperwork to drive, but they don't get the jobs. So you have to really look at those concerns, even if you are the president or if anybody were the president of South Africa, because it is premised upon that you can really address the issue holistically.
Sometimes it's very difficult to understand what really is happening in South Africa, because quite a number of times we've had calls, we've had to speak with some Nigerians living in South Africa. Many of them seem unperturbed by what is happening. They tell you, oh, it is... in a part of South Africa, it is Nigerians who entered illegally, or it is some people who are alleged to be involved in drugs and all of that. But we've heard the South African president say now that they will be more committed to the rule of law. Is that something we can go home and sleep over?
Well, I want to take it with a pinch of salt, because if you don't understand the dynamics of the South African society, you may not be able to make such comments as I've just made. In the first place, South Africa has a history of blacks being completely subjugated. And I must tell you that up until this time that we're speaking, in excess of 90% of what the economy of South Africa thrives upon is controlled, not owned. I've used my word very deliberately, controlled by South Africa. And I must say here, and I stand not to be corrected, that had the wealthy whites of South Africa not strengthened Cyril Ramaphosa, he would never have emerged president, even if Cyril Ramaphosa happens to be, without a doubt, the president of South Africa. So when you're talking about those who pay the piper, definitely the rhythm that actually gets churned out from the flute is dictated by them. Having said that, let us also understand that the experience on the apartheid regime has not really been completely uprooted. In South Africa, a woman is murdered every 3 hours. As of the last year calendar, 2,700 women and 1,000 children were murdered by men. There is something about South Africa. 100 persons get raped every day. I must say this as a matter of importance, that if you look at a country that has such accumulation or recorded history of very terrible attacks against their own, how much more those who are not originally from that space is another thing you have to think about.
You're saying that this is not just about xenophobic attack. It is a fallout of a life of crime.
It's a fallout of a society that at some point in our history subjugated very strongly those who are in the highest of numbers in South Africa. And because essentially they are still not as empowered as their white minority in that country, they always look for exit points for their violence, for their anger. And let's also understand this. It is typical in South Africa, as it is in Nigeria, for men to take the lead, provide for their families. So there's a transfer of the frustrations by virtue of their incapacities on those who are there as well in their country, or foreigners who happen to be the soft targets for them.
All right, but let's look at what is at stake here. The president's visit to South Africa also marks 20th anniversary of what they call the Binational Commission, established between the two countries, I think in 1999, thereabout. And since then, we've seen dozens of trade agreements between the two countries signed. In 2018, in particular, the total value trade between Nigeria and South Africa amounted to close to $3.3 billion. And that makes Nigeria South Africa's largest partner in West Africa. You look at the volume of business between the two countries, and you are saying that perhaps we have something to hold on to and demand that they treat our citizens right.
But you see, anytime they are talking about foreign policies are not made by words of mouth. They are always made from positions of strength. The reason why the volume of trade is in excess of $3 billion at the last year calendar between Nigeria and South Africa, simply because South Africa had more plowed into this economy, and without a doubt have taken more from this economy. On the African continent, if you're talking about their multi-telecommunication network, MTN now, I should say that, you'd find out that 60% of what they get or they make is actually, in the entire Africa, wherever you find MTN, 60% is made from Nigeria by virtue of our population. And of course, you're talking about favorable business environment that we've provided for them. And if you're talking about multinational, you're talking about corporate organizations. South Africa has more of that. Nigeria doesn't have such corporate entities operating in South Africa. If you're talking about individuals, for instance, in the academia in South Africa, Nigerians make up a very reasonable number of or proportion of those within their universities. If you're talking about private businesses or ventures, Nigeria has a stake. But if you're talking about corporate entities, there is imbalance of trade between Nigeria and South Africa, except, of course, you want to talk about some of the solid minerals that Nigeria provides for South Africa. Well, you may not want to talk about gold because South Africa has that in abundance. You may want to talk about the best quality of platinum found in Niger State earlier this year. Nigeria has the best quality although South Africa remains the number one as far as this continent is concerned. So even if we're talking about the volume of trade between us and them, there is imbalance of trade between both countries. And that simply means South Africa has what? A higher or upper hand in their deals.
And perhaps this is why some Nigerians aren't quite supportive of the stance of the federal government. They're saying that maybe the presidency was a little bit too soft in reacting to what has become a consistent report of xenophobic attacks in the Rainbow Nation. So, for instance, we see that it was a private individual who at some point offered to bring back Nigerians who really want to return as a result of the persecution there. And then the fact that all we did up until now was to request an envoy, to speak over this thing. Perhaps we should have, dangled this and say, we're going to withdraw this benefit if you don't sit up.
Okay, let me say this, because anytime we're talking about doing proper analysis of government intervention, and government position on issues, it is good for us to create a balance so that we can give our viewers the proper highlights. I was in Abuja about 3-4 weeks ago. I was at a meeting held by the DG of the Nigerian Diaspora Commission, Abike Dabre. I was privileged to be there, and I have to say, she, in her capacity, brought Tayo Faniro, the Nigerian who was attacked in South Africa. And the reason she did that, of course, journalists, everybody in their numbers attended the event. Now, the reason she did that is to say, okay, Nigeria appears to be taking very solid steps to address this issue. And she brought that Nigerian in to, first of all, show concern. That is a Nigerian. By the way, he's married to a South African. He's got 2 children with the woman in South Africa. And his home that he has made has been in South Africa for the past, I think, 12 to 15 years. Now, the picture created by that is government is interested in addressing that issue. But let us say this in addition. Government perhaps need to do more, having taken that steps, especially at the height of Nigeria's yearning that we need to be catered to. And I think that this is a lesson. Whatever happens or whatever becomes the experience we have, it is indicative of what government perhaps has not done or what government should do. So when we talk about the attacks against Nigerians in South Africa and what government perhaps should have done, I think this is a lesson for the government that next time when your people are attacked in another country, it is ideal for you to take proactive steps in maybe evacuating them from there. It is key. Let us say here, and to be fair, that the Air Peace Director, as it were, is somebody who also feels these are Nigerians. And when you have succeeded within your geographical space, part of what you should do is to give a little bit back to your society, which I think is what he felt the need to do and that he has done, and will probably continue to do.
Another way to look at this is many would say this is a fallout of a deeper issue. Not only South Africa, every day or year in, year out, young Nigerians leave this country in droves. The medical field mentioned recently the concern about brain drain and the fact that even successful Nigerians are interested in moving to places like Canada and other places they consider a greener pasture. And that if this is not checked, we're going to have a situation where we're not only going to be persecuted in South Africa, but in almost every other part of the world, because we seem to have that drive to succeed. But do you consider that a concern or just a normal process of immigration that will happen anywhere in the world?
Let me say here that the greatest nation in the world, at the moment, the United States of America, are essentially strangers in the land where they occupy at the moment. The Apaches, the Powakas, the rest of the people are the owners of the land they occupy today. They had a drive to succeed over 200-300 years ago. They moved from their original homeland and found themselves there, exploring, seeking opportunities to excel. I've referred to that to tell you that migration is not peculiar to Nigerians, even if we need to do more researches into the dynamics of why Nigerians continue to live in droves. I come to my motherland to talk about it. If you check at the moment, between the last calendar year and now, unemployment rate has moved from less than 20%, let me even say the last administration to now, to about 23.1% as of July. The country's debt at the moment is about 24.4 trillion. Now, every country in the world owes, but when the money you owe appears not to perhaps have been deployed to where people feel the impact, you'd have such expectations as wanting to go to other places where your effort is rewarded and you are able to actually survive even if you earn little. Why are people really leaving is the question we should ask. And let us look at the essential things. In the last 3-4 years, Lagos State, for instance, is in control of about 6,500 roads. Under the last administration of Ambody, at the beginning of his administration, he appears to have some ideas about fixing traffic issues. 1.5 years afterwards, second year, I don't know what happens. And before you know, Lagos became a mountain of filth and, of course, a landfill with potholes. We've not recovered from that.
You're tracing these issues back to leadership.
No, leadership is, I'm just trying to tell you that when people begin to see that their expectations are not being met and the basics are not provided for, because every human being is born with survival instinct, you start to think of alternatives. And that is why people resort to crime.
And that is my point precisely. The fact that these alternatives are also some sort of choices, because there are still people who remain in Nigeria, who do business in Nigeria, who survive, who go beyond survival to even succeed. The concern here is how the Nigerian government seems to have reacted to those who returned from South Africa recently. I give them some, some money for call, offered them opportunities via the Bank of Industry, and even went ahead to ask their state government to provide some form of welfare and reintegration program for them. So the concern is, what happens to the Nigerian who did not leave the shores of the country, who perhaps is even more patriotic in some way to stay back, do business here? Would you consider that given too much to those who ran away in the first place?
When you say run away, we have to determine the procedures through which they left the country. So we may not be able to make such general statement that they ran away. Every human being is left with a choice to stay in his or her own country or leave this country. And let me also tell you, some of the people that are in this country, they have more than one nationality. They may not have just got arrested by the DSS some days ago. He's also an American citizen. He carries an American passport. It then tells you that some persons may be here physically, but let me make you smile. Spiritually, they are absent. By virtue of the fact that the same survival instinct that makes somebody who has one nationality seek opportunities elsewhere, get visa to visit other countries, maybe decides when he or she gets there to make a permanent home abroad, is the same thing that will make your citizens who are here, who you see, carry other passport, that at the snap of the finger of unrest, they disappear. So I have to say that people have a choice, and they cannot have those choices questioned to live outside this country if at all what they want to do is legitimate, if at all they believe that such places will enable them fulfill their aspirations as properly as they want it to be, and if at all they feel that the peace of mind that they are seeking may be provided for elsewhere. It is always good when you see people say that, all right, I've succeeded here. Oftentimes you hear a third of the story. And when you hear the full story of how they've succeeded, you know that most of these successes perhaps are also enabled by people outside the country.
It's all right. But let's say how all of this goes in time, because the average Nigerian, they say, is interested in what's happening out there. But at times, the honest truth is that the lawn is greener, from the other side. But it's not always the situation when you get there. As a matter of fact, some will tell you that there are more opportunities here in Nigeria because the problems are many, and then you can proffer solutions and make a living for yourself. Let's get back to this visit. Good. So the 20th anniversary of Binational Commission established between the two countries, and we expect to see some more trade agreements, are signed at this particular 3-day visit. What more benefits do you see this bring to Nigeria as a nation?
Well, first will be tax remittances for their corporate entities, who will add to the ones we have here already. If you're talking about the likes of MTN and talking about many other, like the Stanbic Bank, talk about the ShopRite of this world, you'd agree with me that those entities pay huge tax remittances to the coffers of the FIRs of this country. So first for Nigeria would be that when businesses come, it is the tax remittances. Secondly, it will be that a larger chunk of your population will be employed. So we will see, most likely, a reduction in the percentage of those who are unemployed in this country. Then at the same time, I think anytime corporate entities come, it gives you room for new technologies, new ideas, deployment of fresh expertise that oftentimes Nigerians benefit from and are able to carry on to share with their own people. Because if you find multinational companies coming to your country, usually they deploy their expertise to sustain their businesses, even if they have to incorporate your business model.
What is the implication of that when these foreign companies now form some sort of a monopoly where they are dominant in the market and they seem to, cast a shadow over indigenous companies in that same field?
If you know the history of how cassava came into this country, you'll understand that cassava originally is not a plant from here. The best thing we need to do is to smart up as a people. Let me tell you, only recently, American universities are finding it difficult to give Chinese PhD students admission to study there because they found out that in the past 10, 20 years, they've been coming to study and they take the templates and models from the academic and all of the researches back to their country.
And duplicated there.
And duplicated there. So, and if I tell you, the trade war between the US and China now is not just about trade. It's more about deep issues, part of which I just mentioned to you. I think what we have to do is to be smart. You can't create a monopoly because you can create policies to checkmate the people that want to create a monopoly in your own country. So the best thing for us to do is to get our eggheads together. The country already has a new economic advisory team inaugurated by the president. We have those who are performing very, very astonishingly in respective fields. What you need to do is to deploy these numbers, attach them compulsorily to these multinational organizations and put them on a mission. In the next 5, 10 years, you have to understand how their models work.
That's right.
And you must replicate the same models in this country and create a competition that will either make them co-equals or make your own country superior, and create favorable policies that will enable your own country and those who operate those companies in this country to be able to have such super edge that will help them become your own, rather than have other people control the entities.
Unfortunately, that hasn't been the situation.
This is what
Nigeria.
I'm sharing. It is what many people perhaps don't understand. And the few that are watching, that perhaps have understanding of this, have not had the opportunity to enable government do this. And let us also understand, my president is in his 70s. The vice president evidently may be close or above 60, I should say. Now, when you have those two persons in government, you have to understand that they belong in a generation that has a lot to do in understanding, in appreciating and assimilating the problem-solving skills of this generation. Nigeria has an excess of 50% as young persons. Would you tell me that the government of this country has spent time in creating an institution that actually goes into daily research in understanding how the more than half of the entire population tackle the challenges they have? It is an area of critical research that can help us solve the continuous restiveness that is affecting us. And let me say this. The communication of the president is very critical, and I'm going to refer to two very important instances. I think on his second return from London, when the president was rehabilitating, the president said some people are crossing the red lines. Let's understand, you're talking to a generation that is different from yours. Before you say they are crossing the red line, you must understand the problems within which they are born, their challenges, comparing it to the privileges you had in your time and that they don't have now, before you actually say they're crossing the red line.
Okay.
Then secondly, very importantly, at the independence speech, my president said that Nigerians should learn to obey the law, which is very important for everybody to do that. But many persons whose reactions I've actually sampled over time between then and then have said there are many indications of my president who need to do more with, adhering to the injunctions of the law than telling people.
We've had a lot of definitions on that.
Yes,
area,
so that's another thing.
On whether or not national security, is of more value or takes preeminence over the rule of law. But that's not the content of this discourse.
Yeah, of course.
Let's get back to this visit. It is President Buhari's first visit to South Africa since President Ramaphosa's inauguration earlier this year. And we also know that it is the first visit of a Nigerian president to South Africa since 2013. So we see the two presidents refer to each other as brothers when President Buhari touched down in Pretoria. Is this, well, very significant, very symbolic, but do you see that brotherly affection, cause some form of a ripple effect in the way the average South African will now begin to see the Nigerian who lives next door?
Well, I think that South Africa understands what Nigeria means to them in terms of their entities thriving in the most populous black nation in the entire world. And if you don't use your tongue to count your teeth in that regard, you're going to suffer colossal losses. Do not forget that countries can nationalize multinational organizations. Do not forget that we can create policies. And there is nothing the South African government can do after all. You're operating within our entities. And if you cannot protect the interest of our citizens in your country, what then is the essence of making benefit from my country when my citizens in your country are suffering? So South Africa, I believe very strongly, understand the implication of overlooking what must be really understood. And I think every measure must be taken. Now, don't forget that when you operate at such level of diplomacy, you have to come as a friend rather than a fiend or a foe, or else you're going to be in problem. So I believe very well that the South African authorities understand the importance of Nigeria to their survival as a country, and also understand the essence of keeping the relationship, because you can only become bigger and better when there is unity, and anything that actually affects the fabric of such relationship will be negative. And oftentimes, even if they say there is no winner or there are no vanquished persons during wars, some people suffer more from such economic wars than we have now, just as we see on the international stage. So if you look at this visit, the visit will also make Nigeria begin to rethink our position as a leading nation on the African continent and make further negotiations that can only be to the benefit of our people from a very strong point of view. Don't forget, foreign policies must be made from a position of strength. If you listen to the President of the United States of America at the United Nations General Assembly, you'd find out that Donald Trump did not come there to plead. He came there to tell you what the American government will do.
The American First Agenda.
No,
Let's hold it
definitely.
here very quickly. When
Okay.
we return, we'll look at how the two largest economies in Africa can consolidate on their differences, as well as how they can scratch beyond the surface to identify what has been the root cause of these very many xenophobic attacks that we've recorded in the recent past. We'll take a break and we'll be back with more. Stay with us. Glad to have you join us again. President Muhammadu Buhari is on a 3-day visit to South Africa at the request of President Cyril Ramaphosa, and this is coming aftermath renewed xenophobic attack which affected some Nigerians. Recall that over 100, if not close to 300 Nigerians have already returned after that particular attack. Former relations between these two countries date back to 1994 when the first democratic elections were held in South Africa. Adeniyi Kunnu is public affairs analyst, and thank you so much for staying the course of the program.
Thank you for having me here.
It doesn't appear that the 25-year-old diplomatic relations is at stake. It has never been threatened. I'm not sure the Nigerian government has even, gone as close as say we're going to cut ties if this doesn't end. And this is an attack that has lasted over a decade. How many more Nigerians are, going to be attacked before, or have we come into an era where we don't even touch diplomatic ties for no reason at all?
Well, let's understand that when South Africa attained independence, Nigeria was still writhing in the pains of military dictatorship in the country. Nigeria had a lot of stutterings. An election was won, an election was cancelled. The winner, as agreed to by the current president, MK Abiola, was killed. Kudirat Abiola was killed. The Gogol dictator Abacha died. Many things happened between when South Africa attained independence and when Nigeria returned to democratic rule in 1999. So you may want to completely cancel out when South Africa attained independence to when we actually returned to democracy in 1999. And don't also forget that 1999 was a year where we needed a lot of rejigging to get back. So I take 99 away and I talk about the year 2000, where Nigeria essentially returned to democracy and started walking on its feet after so many leadership stutterings. Having said that, I think you should analyze what has happened at the point of Nigeria's regime or return to democracy in 1994 and now. We have had a lot of internal wranglings amongst the respective leaders. We have had issues with the Niger Delta. We've had concerns of Boko Haram. We've had so much problems that appears to have overwhelmed us that the critical aspect of our foreign relationship may have been given little attention that would have allowed us to be strong enough to actually talk to those whose concerns appears to be secondary to ours. So you must agree with me that Nigeria's internal problems appears to have been very much to deal with, such that addressing foreign policy as it should be addressed may not have been a top burner issue for the country. And that is why at this point, this particular occasion of the returned xenophobia in South Africa appears to have given us another idea about rethinking our policies. Because don't forget, Nigerians will continue to go to different parts of the world. You cannot stop the most populous black nation from continuing to produce those that want to stake their claims in and outside the country.
Apparently, the issue of the role Nigeria played in South Africa's struggle against apartheid has again been re-emphasized by the current South African president. Many Nigerians just feel a sense of ownership or a payback, so to speak. Oh, we were there for you when you were fighting apartheid, and then how dare you forget, the role that we have played in the history of your nation. But this xenophobic attack, or what some call persecution against a Nigerian citizen outside the shores of this country, is not limited to South Africa. We have seen a pastor recently was shot, was killed in China. We've seen the very slave-like condition that some Nigerian migrants are subjected to in Libya and the rest of the world. How do you see Nigerians solving this problem, permanently, so to speak, so that we don't become a subject of ridicule?
Now, the first thing you have to do for people to stop crime is to make them have a sense of self-worth. Let me tell you this, whoever commits crime has lost a sense of worth of either himself or herself or the person that the crime is committed against. And how do you build a person's self-worth if not through education, through learning? The question then would be, what has happened to the learning that we have? I can say very proudly that I'm an outstanding product of the public school education system in Nigeria. I've had the privilege of sitting, of getting certain things done with people who schooled abroad and they didn't fare better. And I am, again, a proud product of Nigeria's public school system. I'm a young man by all standards. I have to say here, what has happened to the country's education system? You're talking about El Rufai creating media buzz because his son attended, or he actually enrolled his son at a public school. Should that be a cause for celebration in the first place?
Unfortunately, it is not the norm as we speak currently.
It is not the norm, I agree with you.
But let me hold you for a
Please.
minute. Turn attention to the phone lines. George has called in now from Acacia. Good morning, George.
Good morning, Nifemi, and good morning to your guest there.
Thank you. Good morning.
Nifemi, if you ask me, the president didn't need to go to South Africa. I personally feel belittled that with what South African government has been doing to our people, our president is sort of playing the whipping boy. That's the way I see it. I may be wrong. My people, the government of Nigeria stuck out its neck to ensure that South Africa got out of trouble when they were, enclaved by apartheid. And now our citizens go to their country for legitimate business. They are doing what they are doing, killing them. I think, in my view, that it is the South African president that should come begging us to forgive them, not our president going there to sort of negotiate. You are playing the whipping boy. How are you the giant? If a cockroach comes to fight an elephant goes to the cockroach to be negotiating.
But Judge, let me ask you a question. Look beyond the president now. Let's say, consider yourself a father whose heart his children attacked in South Africa. Would you rather summon the government or go there yourself to see what's happening?
It's a different scenario. Father
You think so?
Son, yes, this is government to government. Father to son is a different thing entirely. It's a different scenario. The two of them are not the same.
It's all right.
The government of South Africa has demonstrated that they supported what their people were doing to our brothers there.
But the South African president himself had made several broadcasts condemning the attack itself.
He wasn't walking the talk. We have been watching. What they say was different from what they were doing.
It's all right. I think you made your point. Thank you so much for calling in. I also stand to be corrected, but I know that it appears there was a scheduled visit to South Africa
As a matter of
prior
fact,
to this renewed
yeah, you
insurgency.
took that out of me. There were plans in the works for President Buhari to visit South Africa.
I recall that Nigeria boycotted the World Economic Forum
Yes,
on
Nigeria
Africa
did,
as a
and
protest against
Nigeria
attacks.
did, and I think that's an emphatic statement made by the country's absence, especially key person.
Unfortunately, we heard that some other African nations did before Nigeria followed
Well,
suit.
but that's not the only one. Don't forget that Zambia also even cancelled a scheduled football match with South Africa and some other strongly held positions. Anobi Ezekwesili was there, and she actually responded to why she was there. Jim Ovi attended the first and returned because of the outcry. I think that what's important is some people retracted their steps and felt, I hold on to Nigeria. Don't forget also Tiwa Savage was supposed to attend an event and to perform. So many things happened that you wouldn't want to take that away from the picture. And from the thing said by the last caller, I think it's important to understand that at this level, we have to do everything to mitigate the recurrence of this issue. Let's not also forget, I remember very well an elderly person telling me that you always add to friends, you don't subtract from friends. That simply means there are always benefits from making a consolidation of your relationship with people and not let it actually disintegrate, which of course is what the president is attempting to do now.
Let's take this call from our papa. Good morning, Friday.
Morning.
Friday is calling on a Friday. How are you today?
Thank God.
Please go ahead with your contribution.
Yeah, the president visit to South Africa is uncalled for. I didn't like it because what South Africa did to Nigeria is not what we're supposed to go there to go and beg. They are the ones that are supposed to come here to beg us.
But have you forgotten that a South African envoy actually came to Nigeria prior to this visit? It's all right. I think you made your point already, Friday. Thank you for calling in. If we were to put these on a weighing balance,
Yes, please.
xenophobic attack on one side and the economic relations between the two leading African economies on another, which would you say is more important to the Nigerian government?
Sadly first, and I must say this, that people have died. But I want to say this, those who have died wouldn't return. You can negotiate and renegotiate, preserving the lives of your people, even when you attend and deal with economic issues. Because don't forget, the first thing the president talked about was to condemn the killings of Nigerians in South Africa. before everyone went to talk about other things. Don't forget, he's also going to meet Nigeria's business community in South Africa.
That's right.
It therefore means that in all fairness, the president perhaps did not take those steps, maybe making comments, because I remember very well that at the height of it, many people expected the president to say something. The representative in South Africa, everybody kept
I'm
talking.
sorry,
Yes.
I'll have to hold you again. We
Okay,
have a
please.
caller from Arochukwu in Abia State. Good morning, Okorafa.
Good morning, Mr. Nifemi. Good morning, Mr. Adeniyi.
Good morning
sir.
to you, sir. Yes, please.
Well, to me, our president visit to South Africa is a welcome development. As a Nigerian, that is why we normally say back home, we should be talking of forgiving and forgetting. What Nigerian government or diplomats there in South Africa should be talking is cordial relationship between us, because there is no country in this world that is independent. That is what I mean. When you are talking about that is indispensable, that is, you have everything you can talk of in your own country. It's not possible. You must liaise or borrow or tap the technology from another country for your own country to move forward. Let's look at America, what is happening, like what Mr. Adeniyi was saying. You have seen America. America, they know exactly what they can produce and what they cannot sell. When Trump came on board, he told China that GSM will not be functional again in. Yeah, that is a trade business. He placed the own embargo. It's moving. As what are the Americans doing? They now step forward and know exactly what they're doing with their own companies. The same thing applicable to we Nigerians here. Agreed that the sins have been committed. Then we are asking for the forgiveness of sins. But the thing is this: we should look forward. How do we look forward as a country? We know that the GSM, all these Go TV, all of them are from that place. Now, you ask yourself, where back home, do we have all those technicalities to do it here? Yeah, yes. But we are done, the manpower are there, but are we doing it? We are not doing it. We are still collecting from other countries. You will talk about not to relate with other countries. If you have all those things available and you can do it here and do everything and market it outside, but we just collect them. Now, you see what's happening now in China. China, now they have close at least over 6,000 universities. Now they're converting all of them to what? To polytechnics. Why? Because they know exactly what they want in 10 years or 15 years to come.
Okay.
Are we not supposed to do something in Nigeria? Then if we can do something in Nigeria now, we now talk about not to do business with another country.
All right.
Thank you very much. Have a pleasant day.
Thank you for your contribution. Not doing business with other countries, it's not really realistic in the age of globalization. But when he talked about forgiving and forgetting, what comes to mind is the former Dallas policewoman who shot a neighbor. I don't know if you're following that story.
I follow the
and
story,
was
and
to
it's
10
still,
years
it's
in
still
prison.
shocking to me that
And the younger
you missed,
brother,
you missed your apartment and thought an intruder got into your apartment.
I get that point precisely, but my
Yeah.
concern is the younger brother who walked up to her in the courtroom and hugged her and said, "I've forgiven you, I love you, I hope that you change," and all of that.
Should be
but
going for 10 years anyway.
She'll be away for 10 years, and
Yeah.
in 5 years she might get parole.
Yeah.
But are you concerned about the issue the last caller brought up? The fact that look at the South African businesses in Nigeria. It appears they're running a monopoly. As a matter of fact, you take I just do not want to mention names. You take the leading, brands in some of those fields, and aftermath South Africa, perhaps you're thinking China, before you can even come to think of a Nigerian brand.
Okay.
How did we get to that particular sorry situation?
Let me tell you one thing that is instructive that this country is not taking advantage of. Nigeria fought a civil war for 3 years. Nigeria had its support from some countries. Biafra had its support from some set of other countries. But do you know that some of the technologies deployed to fight the war by Biafra were actually produced or manufactured within the Biafra region?
Let me hold you for a minute very quickly to take this caller from South Africa. Oscar Matwe is a Nigerian who's married to a South African and who does business in Cape Town, I believe. Oscar, how is the Nigerian in diaspora community reacting to Mr. President Buhari's 3-day visit to South Africa?
Hello?
Hello, Oscar, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just like before here.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay. I just asked how the Nigerian community in South Africa are reacting to this visit?
Oh, it's a positive one. It's been happening a couple of days now. Most people are elated and very excited about the visit of Mr. President. And we hope that this visit will be able to iron out those grievances, stereotypes, and the criminalities that we kind of getting too used to in living in South Africa. So for now, it's positive.
We're told by the Foreign Affairs Ministry here that the return of Nigerians willing to come back home has been postponed for now while that visit is on. And we've also heard the South African president say that they will be committed to the rule of law, early warning mechanisms to be deployed. But help us understand if all of this talk is actually resonating well with South Africans themselves.
The thing is this, you will have people actually who volunteer on their own, not because the South African government have asked them to come or go back home. Like if you listen to the president's address, President Muhammadu Buhari, he did say that the people must obey the law. And when President Ramaphosa is saying they will commit to the rule of law. Now, it's obvious that anyone who wants to stay or want to do business or whatever you want to do living in South Africa should at least live and apply by what is obtainable here. So for now, I think it's in a positive light that we're hearing this from him. And what we're saying as Nigerian president here is that we want to see more action. And the issue of stereotyping of a certain group of people just have to be discarded.
But how come we had over 300 Nigerians return and you are still sitting pretty in Cape Town? Is this a situation where these attacks affect some Nigerians than others?
No, remember, the system of government here is quite a bit different from what is obtainable back in Nigeria. You do have kind of some extent of independence of the provinces. So Cape Town is, in my opinion, seems to be maybe more organized and the way they manage issues compared to other provinces. So I think that could explain. And if you check the number of people that actually returned back home, there are quite a few from this province. So it's all about where the person is situated, what are you involved in, and for wanting to go back.
But is it accurate that most of the Nigerians affected by these xenophobic attacks are those who got in illegally and those who are engaged in illegitimate business?
The honest truth is this: I engage in a very legitimate business and I'm employing at least 2 South Africans. Now, okay, fine. If you say there are people indulging in wrong business, probably that's the one you've seen. Here I am, a management consultant. I run a consulting firm with 2 people employed who are South African. So how do you judge this? That's why my call to everyone that needs to hear this is this: let's address crime as it is. Let's address crime as it is and not about a certain people or a group of people. That's my challenge.
Oscar Metoye, thank you very much for talking to us on the program this morning. Well, Oscar has almost become a South African. He's married to one, African. And then he has children there already, so there's no coming back home for him. But it's interesting to know that the optimism is high, that perhaps after this meeting, we're going to have a situation that is calmer, and then for once in a long time, we're not going to hear of our people being killed. Beyond all of this is also the fact that Nigeria still needs to stick its foot on the ground and make certain demands. Do you see that happening?
Poor nations don't make demands. Nations negotiate their destinies with other nations from a position of strength. Nigeria needs to first of all do a proper reassessment of our strength in terms of economy, in terms of military, in terms of a lot of things. It is when you first of all come to the realization of your respective strengths that you now begin to reel out your policies and say, this shouldn't happen. I know very well that the president understands that Nigeria is not a country that you want to make mess with, or that you want to actually treat less than it should be treated, or else you're going to bear the brunt of your actions. So I think the thing we should do based on this is to review many of our relationships with our African brothers and sisters, so that when we do this, we can begin to say how many Nigerians are. And another thing that will help.
Just a minute, let me take this call from Kaduna.
Okay.
Good morning, Chidi.
Good morning, Femi.
Glad to have you called. Please go ahead with the contribution.
Thank you very much. Good morning to your guests also.
Good morning to you, sir.
Thank you very much. In fact, the Mr. President's visit to South Africa is a very good one. Diplomatically, it will make the South African government and people to have Nigerians in particular in a very higher esteem. Because it is true that what is happening right in South Africa is not only Nigerians that it is affecting, even some other African nationals. But based on the role that Nigeria as a country played during their apartheid period, Nigeria should be a very big brother in this respect. And I want to believe that Nigeria president having gone there, then other presidents of African descent will equally follow suit.
It's all right.
So that there will be peace in every part of Africa.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Chidi from Kaduna.
Yeah.
We have to go now, so it's not bad after all. An attack happens, and Nigerians sends in the plane to fly back the nation citizens, and then we have our president, go there himself. I'm sure the Nigerians in South Africa must be proud.
They'll be proud, but I have to say that next time, government must take the first step in addressing such situations. You can't leave your citizens. Years ago, when Uganda had Idi Amin's problem, we know what the government of other countries did to evacuate their citizens. You should not allow just your own citizen who has the capacity to take the first step in terms of that next time. And I think government can step in from now if they have to give him certain amounts of money to make up for what is done, or just do something else. And that would have been easier if we had a national carrier. But ultimately, it is to move Nigeria forward, which is important.
Adeniyi Kunnu, public affairs analyst, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us this morning.
Yes, please.
So, will President Buhari and his counterpart in South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa, be able to solve this puzzle and for once put an end to these very disturbing xenophobic attacks? That's a question that we'll see answered in the next couple of days. We're looking forward to see things get better in that part of Africa. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be back next week, God willing.